What began as a dream celebration in Liverpool turned into a nightmare that shook the entire nation. The streets of Liverpool were electric with pride. Flags waved in a fever of red and white, chants echoed like thunder across rooftops, and the city prepared to etch its name into football history. After years of sweat, setbacks, and sacrifice, Liverpool FC was finally crowned champions for the 20th time. Nearly 1 million fans surged onto the streets, their hearts swelling with joy, their voices uniting in a chorus of triumph. From Allerton Maze to the Strand, a 10-mile route became a river of human emotion. The open-top bus carried more than players, it carried the dreams of generations. It wasn't just a sports parade, it was a spiritual victory, binding a city with its soul. Children were hoisted onto shoulders, strangers embraced like old friends, and the city beamed as if nothing could go wrong. But fate had a darker plan. As the sun dipped below the skyline and shadows stretched long across Water Street, jubilation dissolved into screams. A vehicle, out of control and unannounced, tore through the crowd like a ghost with no warning. There was no time to react, no time to shield the innocent. In a matter of seconds, the celebration turned into carnage. 47 people were left wounded. Blood stained the asphalt where confetti had just fluttered. 4 children were among the injured, some fighting for their lives in critical condition. Chaos erupted. Parents screamed. Sirens wailed. The sound of joy was replaced by something far more terrifying. Silence, broken only by the sobs of a city in shock. The very street that had carried victory now bore the scars of tragedy. Videos of the aftermath flooded social media, replacing moments of glory with horrifying images of bodies strewn across the pavement. The world watched in disbelief as what was meant to be Liverpool's proudest hour unraveled into a national trauma. Hospitals overflowed, news anchors trembled, and an entire country was forced to process the unthinkable, that in the blink of an eye, joy could shatter. By the next morning, Britain was mourning not just the injuries, but the broken spirit of a nation that had come together for celebration and left with wounds that would not easily heal. The energy had shifted. The flags that once symbolized victory now felt like silent reminders of what had been lost. And as the public tried to comprehend the cruelty of what had happened, eyes turned toward the one institution that could provide both stability and solace. But while the city reeled from the horror, the royal family did something unexpected, something deeply human. The Prince and Princess of Wales did not stay silent. They stepped forward with heavy hearts. As the nation reeled from the horror in Liverpool, there was a collective pause, an aching stillness that demanded more than sympathy. The country needed direction. They needed compassion. And when voices around them faltered, William and Catherine rose not as royals bound by protocol, but as parents, as leaders, and as human beings navigating grief with the rest of the nation. In a rare and deeply personal move, they released a joint statement, not through a traditional press conference or a polished public address, but through a modern, strikingly intimate platform, their Instagram story. This wasn't just a shift in medium, it was a declaration. This moment wasn't about royalty, it was about connection. The statement began with the weight of genuine emotion. "We are profoundly shocked and heartbroken by the tragic events that unfolded in Liverpool." Those words didn't come from a palace scribe, they came from 2 people who, like the rest of the country, were stunned by the fragility of joy. A day meant to unite the nation had left dozens suffering, and William and Catherine refused to treat that as a fleeting news item. Their message acknowledged every parent's nightmare, every shattered dream lying on that pavement, every scream that echoed after the car had vanished. Their tone was solemn, but not distant. It carried the emotional urgency of 2 individuals who understood the stakes not just as heirs to the throne, but as mother and father to 3 young children. But it wasn't just about expressing sorrow. Their words carried something even more vital: unity. At this time, when the nation grieves with Liverpool, we remain steadfast in our support for one another. With those lines, they extended a hand not from atop a throne, but from within the chaos. It wasn't a performance, it was a promise. And when they thanked the emergency responders who acted with such courage and urgency in the face of horror, the message rang louder than any headline. It said, "The crown stands with you not behind a wall of tradition, but right here, in the dirt and the heartbreak." What stunned the public wasn't just what was said, it was how it was said. William and Catherine have long walked the line between regal reserve and emotional transparency. But in this moment, they chose transparency. They chose vulnerability. Their message didn't just acknowledge the tragedy, it mirrored it. And by doing so, it became more than a royal response. It became a rallying cry for a wounded nation. Across television screens, Twitter threads, and classroom discussions, their words echoed like a soft but firm embrace. This wasn't a calculated move or a ceremonial obligation. It was the raw, unfiltered grief of two people whose positions demanded strength, but whose hearts refused to remain guarded. And in that delicate balance between duty and emotion, something shifted. The country didn't just hear from its future king and queen, they saw them. They felt them, but their response wasn't just written, it was felt. In their actions, the nation saw something profoundly different. In a moment that defied centuries of tradition, Catherine broke protocol for love and memory. It happened quietly, almost unexpectedly, at a Buckingham Palace garden party meant to uplift a nation still aching from recent wounds. Amid the floral arrangements and formal attire, the Princess of Wales did something so deeply human, so unmistakably emotional, that it pierced the carefully polished royal armor. Catherine spotted an old friend in the crowd, Holocaust survivor, Stephen Frank. And without hesitation, she opened her arms and embraced him. It was a gesture simple in appearance, yet monumental in meaning. Because within the royal family, hugs, especially with members of the public, are rarely seen. They are not forbidden, but they are quietly frowned upon. Yet in that moment, Catherine chose heart over handbook. Their connection wasn't random. It dated back to 2020, when Catherine, an avid and gifted photographer, captured Stephen and his granddaughters for a project honoring the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. That portrait was more than a photograph. It was a bridge between past suffering and present remembrance. Stephen Frank, a Dutch-born survivor of the Theresienstadt concentration camp, had shared his trauma, his resilience, and his legacy with the future Queen of England. And Catherine hadn't just listened, she had immortalized it in her lens. When they reunited this time, after years and a global pandemic, it was not just an official engagement. It was a reunion of souls. That embrace wasn't staged, it wasn't anticipated, but it was real. And in a world where royal actions are measured, in headlines and headlines judged in whispers, this single hug rippled across the nation. For the public, it wasn't just a rare show of emotion. It was a sign that Catherine's understanding of her role had evolved. She wasn't just there to represent the crown, she was there to connect. And as the image of that embrace spread, it reignited conversations about the role of the monarchy in modern times. It challenged what tradition should look like when compassion takes center stage. More than a sentimental reunion, this moment spoke to Catherine's deep commitment to remembrance, history, and human dignity. It's one thing to issue a royal statement acknowledging a tragic event. It's another to physically bridge the gap between past horror and present hope with a gesture that cannot be rehearsed. The embrace symbolized something powerful, that the memory of the Holocaust isn't just confined to textbooks or ceremonies. It lives in the bodies and stories of survivors like Stephen Frank, and it finds guardians in unlikely places, including Kensington Palace. As the crowd around them looked on, something shifted in the atmosphere. In that embrace, there was a message. Far louder than any speech, a message that reminded the public of the monarchy's potential not just to represent, but to feel. In breaking protocol, Catherine honored a legacy greater than her title. She gave space for healing. She allowed emotion to guide duty. And through that, she reminded a grieving nation that even within centuries-old tradition, there's always room for humanity. But Catherine wasn't the only one embracing change. William followed his heart, too, in a moment rooted in grief and resilience. It only took one question, and William's pain became visible to the world. The walls that royalty often build around themselves are thick, polished, and centuries old. But sometimes all it takes is a simple human moment to break them down. It happened quietly, without fanfare, during an investiture ceremony at Windsor Castle. Prince William stood tall, the symbol of stability, a man raised to balance royal restraint with public expectation. But then came a moment that cracked through it all. A deaf teacher named Wendy Daunt stepped forward to receive her honor. She spoke to William not just about her work, but about his mother, Diana. The name alone was enough to shift the atmosphere. It lingered in the air like something sacred. And then she asked, almost instinctively, "Can I have a hug?" There was a beat of silence. And in that instant, William was no longer the heir to the throne. He was a son. A boy who lost his mother under a spotlight so unforgiving it scarred a generation. His eyes flicked from side to side. He hesitated. Not because he didn't want to, but because, for a brief second, duty clashed with emotion. Protocol screamed, "No," but memory whispered, "Yes." And then, in one motion, he embraced her. What happened next wasn't just a gesture. It was a revelation. In that hug, William broke the rules that had kept him insulated for decades. He opened the door to a part of himself the public had rarely seen, a part shaped by unimaginable loss. The cameras didn't need to zoom in. The public felt it instantly. This wasn't just a prince doing his job. This was Diana's son, standing in her shadow, finding his own way to honor her legacy. His mother, known for reaching out to those no one else dared to touch, would have done the exact same thing. And that's what made it unforgettable. The moment spread like wildfire. Social media lit up, not with judgment, but with overwhelming compassion. People weren't just praising William, they were seeing him, seeing the weight he carried, the grief he still bore, the humanity he refused to hide. In embracing Wendy, he embraced every mourner who had ever lost someone they couldn't replace. Every child who had grown up too fast. Every royal who had been told to feel less in order to serve more. That hug wasn't just for Wendy. It was for Diana. It was for William. And it was for everyone still trying to find their voice after loss. There was something cathartic about it. Something healing. Because for years, William had been the steady one, the composed one, the controlled figure while chaos brewed around him. But in that one moment, he showed that even kings in waiting bleed like the rest of us. That grief doesn't vanish with time, it simply hides in corners, waiting to be seen again. And when it's finally acknowledged, the world doesn't crumble, it connects. As William and Catherine connected with the people, another royal took action where it mattered most, on the front lines of the tragedy. Where others offered words, Princess Anne walked into the aftermath. As Britain struggled to make sense of the catastrophe in Liverpool, the headlines were still fresh, the wounds still open. Emergency rooms echoed with urgency, streets were cordoned off with grief, and the scent of celebration had long been replaced by the stark reality of survival. While public figures across the nation posted condolences and commentators filled the airwaves with speculation, Princess Anne chose a different path. She didn't send a message. She didn't make a statement. She arrived, unannounced to most, unscripted and unshaken. At Royal Liverpool University Hospital, where the injured had been rushed in the chaos of that fateful evening, Anne met with those who had held the line between life and death, nurses, doctors, paramedics, and trauma responders who had seen more in one night than many see in a lifetime. She listened as they recounted the horror. She stood beside them not as a royal figurehead, but as someone offering presence where comfort was rare. There was no grand speech, no media flair, only quiet nods, focused eyes, and that characteristic stoicism that has long defined her public image. And yet, behind that calm was something unmistakable, genuine care. In a monarchy that often leans on formality, Anne's approach is refreshingly different. Her strength doesn't rely on words, it's in action. And on that day, her presence wasn't about optics, it was about obligation. With King Charles still recovering and the nation in emotional disarray, she stepped in not for ceremony, but for solidarity. Her brother's absence was not a vacuum, because Anne filled it not with speeches, but with steadiness. She gave those who had witnessed the tragedy something far more valuable than applause or recognition. She gave them dignity. What stood out wasn't what she said, but what she didn't. In rooms filled with chaos and trauma, Anne carried stillness. In the faces of overwhelmed responders, she offered recognition. The survivors didn't need reassurances. They needed someone to stand there and acknowledge their pain without trying to reframe it. And that's exactly what she did. She brought, with her, not the weight of a crown, but the respect of a nation. The visit may not have been dramatic in appearance, but its impact was profound. For those who were there, Anne's presence spoke volumes. She reminded the country that leadership isn't always loud and compassion doesn't need fanfare. In stepping into the chaos, she brought order, not the kind that fixes everything, but the kind that says, "We see you, we're with you." While Princess Anne honored the living, the nation began asking, how could something so joyous turn so tragic? One reckless act turned a historic day into a symbol of national mourning. At precisely 6 p.m. on May 26th, joy was ripped apart in an instant. Liverpool, a city that had been pulsing with pride, found itself gripped by horror. The parade had been flawless until it wasn't. As fans stood shoulder to shoulder along the 10-mile celebration route, their voices still echoing with songs of triumph, a car broke through the crowd barriers with terrifying speed. There was no warning, no time to react. It careened into a pedestrian crossing near Water Street, turning cheers into screams and applause into panic. The vehicle didn't stop. By the time first responders reached the scene, the damage had been done. The aftermath was carnage. Dozens lay injured, their bodies sprawled where victory banners once waved. Among the 47 casualties were 4 young, children, innocent bystanders, whose only mistake was showing up to celebrate with their heroes. Emergency services worked with desperate urgency. Sirens pierced the air as ambulances raced toward nearby hospitals, their lights flashing against streets now stained with trauma. It wasn't a terror attack. It wasn't planned, but its impact was no less devastating. The chaos left behind a wound not just in Liverpool, but in the heart of an entire nation. As investigators secured the scene, questions swirled around the vehicle, the driver, and the circumstances. Was it an accident? Was it a deliberate act? Early reports were conflicting. The only certainty was that a moment meant to inspire future generations had been turned into a story that children would now remember with fear. Within hours, trauma teams at Royal Liverpool University Hospital were working around the clock. Dr. Mark Lucky, the Divisional Medical Director for Surgery at Aintree University Hospital, issued a statement to the press. His words were clinical, yet chilling. Not major traumas, but lives deeply impacted. The physical injuries might heal. The emotional scars, however, would not, and the country felt every ounce of that pain. Social media, once filled with photos of fans celebrating shoulder to shoulder in team jerseys, quickly transformed into a digital memorial. Hashtags of solidarity emerged. Thousands of messages flooded in from every corner of the UK. Candles were lit in windows. Makeshift shrines appeared at the site of the incident, flowers, flags, and handwritten notes from children who couldn't yet process what had happened. A city that had gathered to honor its football legacy was now mourning its shattered innocence. And Britain, as a whole, was once again reminded that tragedy has no regard for timing. Yet within that darkness, a question began to rise, one that always echoes in times of national sorrow. Who will guide us through this grief? Who will show us how to carry on when joy has turned to dust? The answer, in Britain's long history, is almost always the same. But in every tragedy, Britain turns to its symbols of unity. The question became, how would the monarchy respond next? This wasn't just about one tragedy, it revealed a shift in royal identity. In the past, the monarchy stood at a distance, silent, symbolic, and stoic. It was a fixture of tradition, defined by protocol and protected by formality. But in Liverpool's darkest moment, something changed. This time, the response wasn't cloaked in ceremony, it was raw, immediate, personal. And for many, it was the first real glimpse of what a new kind of monarchy might look like. One that doesn't just reign from afar, but reaches in, touches the pain, and stands beside the people who carry it. The royal family, once known for shielding itself from public emotion, is now learning how to share in it. Not through staged appearances, but through authentic presence. Over the last decade, and especially since Diana's death, there's been a slow but undeniable transformation, a shift from being guardians of tradition to becoming emblems of empathy. Where once silence was the protocol, now words, hugs, and heartfelt statements fill the void. This evolution didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen by accident. It was born from necessity, from public demand, and from the legacy of a woman who, in life and death, challenged everything the crown once stood for. Diana was the first to break the mold, to show that royalty could feel, could cry, could touch those the world forgot. And now, her son and his wife are quietly continuing that rebellion, not by tearing down the institution, but by reshaping it from within. William and Catherine are not trying to be celebrities. They're trying to be something far harder, accessible symbols of leadership in a world that no longer trusts titles alone. Their gestures, however small, carry weight. A hug, a heartfelt message, a moment of shared grief. Each one chips away at the walls built by centuries of distance. Each one brings the people closer to the crown. It's a delicate balance, honoring the past while redefining the future. And yet, the response to the Liverpool tragedy proved it's not only possible, it's necessary. The public no longer wants perfection. They want authenticity. And in Catherine's embrace of a Holocaust survivor, in William's hug for a stranger who spoke of his mother, in Anne's quiet visit to a hospital floor covered in pain, the monarchy showed that it's listening, that it's learning, that it's evolving. This isn't a complete transformation. Not yet. But it's a signal. The crown isn't just surviving, it's adapting. And in doing so, it's finding a new kind of strength, not in grandeur, but in grace. Not in control, but in compassion. The monarchy has long been defined by its ability to endure. Now, it's being defined by its ability to empathize. And that shift might just be what keeps it alive in a world where power without connection no longer resonates. As the royal family evolves, they carry a burden, one that grows heavier with every national heartbreak. In grief, they found grace. And in tragedy, a nation remembered its strength. The silence that followed the chaos in Liverpool didn't linger for long. It was soon replaced by something far more powerful: unity. As the royal statement made its way across screens and news feeds, a flood of responses poured in. There was no room for cynicism, not this time. From grandmothers in Glasgow to students in Leeds, the nation reacted not with politics, but with empathy. Comment sections became spaces of collective mourning. Reposts of William and Catherine's words were shared not just for their content, but for the comfort they brought. In those few lines, people found what they didn't know they needed: acknowledgement, connection, and the rare feeling that someone truly understood. But the response didn't stop online. Across Liverpool, something extraordinary happened. The very streets where fear had taken root just days earlier began to bloom with resilience. Locals launched blood drives so large they had to turn donors away. Community halls opened their doors for vigils, food banks, and counseling services. Families who had never spoken before embraced, as if they had always known one another. A young girl who had survived the crash was gifted hundreds of handmade cards from strangers. People brought more than flowers, they brought themselves, their time, their solidarity, their shared pain. The city didn't just mourn, it mobilized. Amid this outpouring, there was a renewed spotlight on those who often go unnoticed. The emergency responders, once seen as background figures in a national tragedy, were now being hailed as heroes in every conversation. Nurses were given standing ovations in supermarkets. Paramedics were sent meals by anonymous donors. Firefighters, who had rushed to the scene without knowing what they'd find, were suddenly surrounded by appreciation they had never asked for, but always deserved. The trauma was deep, but the gratitude ran even deeper. And quietly, in the background, the royal family didn't vanish. They didn't dominate the narrative either. They simply remained present. In every word they spoke, in every visit made, they provided something crucial: stability without stiffness, emotion without theatrics. Their presence didn't erase the pain, but it helped guide the nation through it. That's the role the monarchy plays when it works not as rulers above, but as symbols within. And when they align with the people, when they step off the pedestal and walk into the sorrow, they remind us why their place in British life still matters. Because sometimes, all a nation needs is to feel seen. To know that its grief is shared, not ignored. That its struggles are not beneath the crown, but within its reach. This moment in Liverpool won't be forgotten not because of the horror, but because of the healing that followed. In those long days after May 26th, Britain proved that tragedy can ignite something greater than sorrow. It can spark connection, compassion, and even in the quietest corners, hope. Because in the end, even palaces built on tradition are held together by love, loss, and the courage to stand with the people when it matters most. Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.